Welcome to Café with Cavanha. Today we have with us Rune Eng, President and CEO at Spectrum Geo. Welcome, Rune. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here in Brazil again. Is it the first time you are in Brazil?
No, this is probably 10 times or so.
Times.
Yeah.
By Spectrum. Because you
No.
worked in other companies, other seismic companies before, no?
I worked with PGS, and PGS had operations in Brazil from the late 90s to early 2003-04.
Oh, great. So that time you moved to Spectrum.
That time I was quite a lot in Rio, but then I moved to Spectrum in 2010.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. 9 years.
9 years.
Great. Rune, in Brazil, we had 5 bid rounds in these last 2 years. Permanent offer of blocks now available, very strong situation. Transfer of rights bid to happen this year, before the end of the year. Is a new phase for seismic acquisition in Brazil, you mean?
Yes, I think so. If you look at the first of all, this the permanent offer, I think, is very important for attracting other oil companies than just the majors. We have seen the super majors in coming in the bigger areas like Santos and Campos, but usually quite high bonuses to pay to get a block. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing with a permanent offering where you have open rounds that smaller companies can actually apply and also then participate in perhaps blocks that are not that popular as the golden blocks. That's always
pre-salt ones.
The pre-salt ones are always very attractive, and so I think this is very positive for the permanent offering, and I also think it's positive now that we have some transparency on the new rounds coming in 2019, and we have in 2020, and we even looking at license rounds in 2021.
Predictability, so you can see.
So you can see and you can predict, and oil companies can then plan for their investments and participate. It's even the sectors are given of where they think that the license rounds is going to be in 2020 and 21. So oil companies can plan much better. So I think the license rounds is obviously it's obviously very positive, and also the fact that the government seems to be much more open for, and I would say probably more pragmatic in terms of business and be more open, and we can see how the government is trying to turn the economy from being a bit more restricted to try to open more liberal and open for new investments. So I think that's very positive.
And for seismic point of view, so companies are coming to Brazil to make more spec surveys and contracts to analyze our data and our opportunities to offer to the majors and in permanent offer for the not so big companies too.
Yes. So it's created, I think, from typically the pre-salt areas. You're probably looking at 10 bigger oil companies that could participate. Now we have also seen that some of the national oil companies, like the Chinese, CNOOC and CNPC, and also Petronas, are very interested in coming into Brazil. But we are seeing now that the interest has come probably from 10 companies to probably more like 15, 20 different oil companies that participate in the open rounds and try to get blocks. So diversity of companies are always
good,
important.
important.
Yeah, yeah.
And Rune, in this same matter, I mean, how do you compare Brazil opportunities with Gulf of Mexico, North Sea, Africa coast? Is it possible to make a comparison?
Yeah, I think so. I think the beauty of Brazil is that it's been partially underinvested. So also again because the government wants to stimulate in more investments and have more openness in the economy, and part of that is that you have what I call top-class sedimentary basins like the Santos Basin, where I think first discovery was made in 1970, and it's 350,000 square kilometers. It's a huge basin, but it's just in the recent, I would say, 10, 15 years, where it's become very popular now, and everyone wants to go into Santos, everyone to have a stake in Campos Basin, and these are huge basins. I mean, I would say as strong that probably Santos is probably the super basin of the world right now. And it's probably difficult. You can see how some of the bigger oil companies are pulling out of the more mature areas in the North Sea. Certainly also Gulf of Mexico, where I think the investment environment has turned probably a bit more negative than positive over the last 5-10 years. And therefore Brazil is an obvious target where you can make a billion-barrel discovery and at the same time have call it good investment climate to live with. So as far as I can see, and it's a huge coast, so you have everything from the Pelotas Basin all the way down to Uruguay and all the way up to French Guiana, where you have the Fossa Amazonas. So it's almost like a microcontinent where you have all kinds of different sedimentary basins within the same country. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And about Mexico, the Mexico side, is attractive too, I mean, for seismic operations, seismic acquisition now?
In the Gulf of Mexico and Mexico
side?
Yes, I think so. But again, that's I always say when it comes to investments, whether it's an oil company or a seismic company, is that you have two kind of risk. You have the subsurface, which is always about geology and how big we can find discoveries. But then it's above ground risk. And above ground is usually related to politics. It's about the tax regime. It's about stability. And there you can see that probably Mexico has turned to the worse over the last 5 years, because there's been a new election, and we see a slightly trend towards
less liberal, going to
Pemex going back again, holding up new license round. And this is in contrast to what they have done in Brazil, where we have actually encouraged to get more license round, more investment, and probably take away a bit of the monopoly of Petrobras. And we started that process in Mexico, but it looks like it's stopping up a little bit. Yeah.
So you mentioned something very interesting, so Brazil is becoming a better place to work and to invest, specifically for seismic operations and for oil companies too. And which variables you consider, if you can line for me 2 or 3 variables? Geology you mentioned, regulation, what else you have?
Well, I think that comes back to the global float of investment power. So that's one thing that is truly global is cash and investment power, whether it's an oil company, is a seismic company, or any company for that sake that seeks the best investment opportunities. And I think in that sense it seems that Brazil is actually now attracting much more investments that it has done in the previous decade. So I think you will see that over the next 10 years you will have more investment in exploration and production than you saw in the previous 10 years in Brazil, simply because the government is so they're trying to stimulate investments and try to decouple the monopoly from Petrobras. So I think the above ground risk in Brazil is coming down, while we're seeing other places that also try to have license run, like for example Argentina, that may have some problems with economy and their currency.
Different from Mexico. Mexico is a kind of a decision, state decision. Argentina more in terms of economy.
Yes.
Strongness. Yeah.
But also it always boils down to, I think, decisions from the administration.
Yeah.
So Argentina probably has a history where people are a bit uncertain about investing for the future.
That's true.
And Mexico, I just think it's the new president has openly stated that he wants to empower Pemex more. So even in that, call it competition for global investment, Brazil is actually now competing in first division.
Good, excellent. Yeah. And talking about a little bit about technologies. Technologies are stable in seismic acquisition or are being transformed a lot. What's really happening in technologies for seismic?
So it's probably changed a lot over the last 10, 15 years ago, because we have, especially in Brazil and other areas where you have had exploration and drilling for a long time, is that you usually started with some call it early investigations like 2D seismic, airborne gravity, things like that, and then you start to zoom in on the most attractive areas, and I do like 3D seismic. Then you make discoveries and you start production, and then you do what you call the 4D seismic, and the 4D seismic is really repeating seismic over time to see the variations in the reservoir, how the water is moving, so you can best place the new wells in your drilling campaign. So I think what we have seen is that call it the resolution of seismic, so you can see better,
more details,
and you can also see. We have started with a new technology called a seabed seismic, where you put nodes on the seabed.
Mm-hmm.
And the nodes on the seabed gives you a better coupling to the earth. So you actually get better signals and you can see even more. Now we're talking about the resolution in seismic of less than 1 meter.
Very good.
So that's
Very
quite
good.
impressive.
Consider the size of reservoirs, and so it's very good.
And also the fact that some of the reservoirs sits in 2,000 meter water depth, and then you may have 2 kilometers of salt, and then down at 5-6 kilometers you have your actual reservoir.
Wow, a challenge.
So it takes a lot, 6 kilometers down to see 1 meter of resolution. That's pretty good.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Rune, rigs and drilling operations are very concerned to cybersecurity and things related to that. Seismic has the same situation for cybersecurity?
I don't think that has the same, because of course we're always concerned about our data security and everything, but in most cases the storage and how we deal with our seismic data is actually dealt with in a relatively safe and efficient way. But of course, as we're starting, as you say, talking about big data, where we're building up we're talking about terabytes of data, and we're talking about global databases. Then, especially if you start to store all your data in the cloud, then we may see a problem with big data. So I think big data and security probably will be part of this development into what we call artificial intelligence, where you're using all your data to find trends. So when Exxon makes a discovery in Guyana, they want to take all the data that they have globally and see if I can find the same characteristics of the Guyana discovery in Africa or other places. And that's actually, a human being will take to interpret a 3D seismic of, for example, a typical block in Brazil, which could be like 2,000-3,000 square kilometers. It probably takes that person 5 to 6 months to interpret as a human being, while if you do it within a computer-based system, you probably do it within less than a day.
Wow, it's totally different. And
it's very different.
It's a matter very interesting nowadays. You are seeing in newspapers TGS and Spectrum joining forces. Can you explain us a little bit about this merge and the future and the market and clients?
Yes. Spectrum was listed on the stock exchange in 2008. And it means that we have built up a very big multi-client database. And it's of course like that when you are in a competition with like TGS and CGG and Western Geco and PGS and Halliburton. They all try to put libraries together of seismic or well information. And we have been very successful over the last 6 years, and particularly in South America, where I think TGS realized that what they're missing in their global portfolio is that footprint that we have in South America and also in Africa. So very simple, TGS made a bid on the company. We will see how that goes, because it basically means that it's the shareholders that needs to vote and decide if this is going through. And that's probably going to happen in June 2019, so in about 1 month. Mm-hmm. And then eventually it's up to the shareholders to decide whether this is a good deal or not for the shareholders. But it's from an industrial point of view, mm-hmm. This is going to be the world's largest multi-client library.
Oh, really?
Yes. So it is probably becoming fairly dominant in terms of what we call, you mentioned it, big data and the global footprint that enables any oil company to screen. Mm-hmm. If we're getting there on the artificial intelligence, combining these two libraries, you have a very efficient tool to screen new opportunities worldwide.
These two companies are complementary companies in terms of business, or they are competitive?
Their business model is very much the same in terms of how we operate and how we deal with our clients. But it's geographically, Spectrum is much more focused on the southern part of the globe. So we're strong in South Atlantic, also in Mediterranean, also in East Africa and in Australia, while TGS is probably stronger in like US Gulf of Mexico, North Sea and Canada.
So good, because markets are being complemented. Well,
absolutely.
Very good merge. Yep. And in terms of spec survey and non-spec, I mean the regular contracts, these both companies do the same proportion of these two situations of contracts?
So TGS is quite a lot bigger than us, but in terms of if you look at the investment power, then Spectrum probably is going to invest about $150 million in 2019, while TGS is more likely going to invest 300 to 350. So together will be about $500 million. but TGS investment is running at twice the level as we are, so they are a bigger company.
Oh, good. Rune, how an oil company choose a seismic provider service? How they choose? What are the variables they consider to pick one?
From an oil company point of view?
Yeah.
So I think oil companies have probably also changed quite a lot over the last, I would say from the peak in the industry in 2013, where the global market for seismic was about 9-10 billion US dollars, and it's probably come down to about 3 or 4. And this is because oil companies have reduced their call it replacement, reserve to replacement ratios gone down, and they're focused on just keeping the existing production going as good as possible. But so it has turned a little bit, I think, from earlier in the cycle where it was a lot about technology and developing new technology, but then suddenly oil companies and also the service industry realizes that, well, if we don't get paid for it, we're not going to develop it. And that's where Schlumberger has taken a hit and said, we're not going to develop new technology unless we get paid for it. And they have stopped on seismic. CGG is still quite active on R&D and developing data processing. But I think it's probably, in terms of when you do a selection, it's probably more on the price, of course, but also the reputation and the HCC qualifications that you have, safe operations that will always be an important factor.
Environment is an issue in Brazil, for your vision?
Environment is always an issue everywhere you operate, but not that much only for seismic, but the whole, call it development chain from early exploration to production. So perhaps environment in Brazil has been a bit more pronounced than you have seen other places where you have regulatory set rules. While in Brazil, it's always from area to area. You need to do environmental assessment. You need to do beach monitoring. So almost like, because this is a huge coast, it's almost like starting all over again if you move from one area to another area.
Excellent. Well, very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate this conversation. And it's a pleasure to meet you here again in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. I will come back.
Good, excellent. Okay. Good evening for everyone. Thank you.